This is TWiT.
I mean, I hate to talk about a Google event on a Mac show, but I guess we kind of have to.
So much of it is coming to iOS anyway.
Is most of it?
Or your Mac on a browser.
Yeah. So the assistant's going to be updated, they say 10 times faster. They're really taking a page from Apple's playbook, Rene, because there's a lot of this stuff is on device now, as Apple's stuff has been for some time.
Yeah, I mean, I want to be both optimistic and pessimistic about this because we're just coming off Facebook F8 where they decided that they could say the word privacy and that would be enough for most people without having to actually do any privacy stuff. And I think Google has way better intentions here, but Google still needs massive amounts of data and they're candid about that. Like, you know, they'll give you the ability to erase your data in 3 months, not today, but in 3 months. And those are certainly steps forward. And what they're doing here is they've managed to shrink the data set from, I forget what they said, like 400 or 200 gigabytes.
They got it down from 200 gigabytes to 200 kilobytes or something.
To half a gigabyte.
Half a gigabyte. Yeah, it was amazing. Yeah.
And because of the speed on device, it was the closest thing we've seen yet to like an actual Marvel Studios Jarvis or like Knight Rider kit style demo where you could actually have a conversation in real time. Not say something, pause, wait, say the command word again, pause, wait, say the command, but just talk conversationally, and it was launching apps and keeping up and doing everything with it. It's not shipping today, not shipping tomorrow, shipping later this year.
On the new Pixel phone, not until Pixel 4, but
yeah.
And so it might go back, though, and hoping it goes back a bit.
I'm sorry, go ahead, Lory.
The one thing that comes to my mind when I hear them talking about how this AI can kind of answer these questions sequentially without needing to have the trigger word used. But then I immediately start thinking, well, how long is this thing listening to me then? And I think that's where it gets a little bit concerning when they talk about privacy and security. But then is this AI always listening? And is that something that we want?
Well, it is now. I mean, it's always listening for a pattern.
The only difference, I wish that they had spoken about it. Like, I wish they'd explained it. But it's like before you had A/B, you had on, off. It was binary. Now there are if statements in between, and that introduces complexity. But complexity is manageable.
They've talked about this before. I think there's a 2-minute window. Siri has this too, this contextual.
And if you yell no or stop with the alarm clock, right? So if the alarm clock is going off, then listen for no instead of the trigger
I loved
word.
that,
so
by the way. That might be the single most important feature, that when your Google Home alarm,
applause.
It did. The alarm is going off. You can just shout "stop" and it will stop.
And I mean, but this was by far the most interesting announcement of the entire thing, moving the AI model onto the device. And for me, yes, it was privacy, but also I'm glad that they pointed out all of the implications of this, that now that we don't have to force everybody to be using the same central AI model, we can actually customize the AI model on device directly. So the one of the big demos they gave, and they actually have a project name for it, is that, well, not a lot of people, they might have speech impediments or they might have certain handicaps that will make it difficult for a traditional voice model to understand them. But now they can create a model that will make sure that they understand their voice particularly. And also the ability to if it's on device and it's not necessarily exchanging data with Google, and like Rene says, we have to wait for further announcements and further sessions of I/O to find out the details of this. But if it really is going all on device, you have the ability to say that certain data should absolutely never be uploaded to Google. Now you have the ability to have it listen in on all of your phone conversations and all of your texts. They had a great demo where they basically turned a phone conversation into a text message interaction, because it could on the fly turn into text whatever this person on the other end of the phone conversation was saying, and then turn whatever you were typing into natural sounding speech.
Yeah, I have that right
people
here,
who
so
again
we can show that. That's Project Euphonia, by the way, Andy, and they did solicit people who have speech difficulty. If you have somebody who knows somebody who might help them with Project Euphonia, g.co/euphonia. Can you hear? Is my sound not?
I love the non-obtrusive UI too. It doesn't block out the entire screen and lets you still see it.
And they're claiming 10 times faster.
The biggest thing for me, though, that was different this year is when they talked about duplexing these technologies, they said it was part of a conversation. They weren't just giving you this massive tech demo. They said, we understand it's sensitive. We want to discuss this. We want to have all this. And just that subtle difference makes it so much more approachable for people and so less stressful.
That's the difference, I think, between Google and Facebook. I cannot be convinced that Facebook gives a damn about security, gives a damn about privacy. And you have to convince me that if there's any opportunity they have to collect information and make sure that you don't know that they're collecting it, if it's valuable, that they'll take it. Whereas Google, like you said, Rene, I do think that they're open and honest about why they want your information, but I do think they make a very sincere expression that we take this thing seriously. Obviously, there are things that we would like to be able to track for you, and that does benefit our business. However, we would also, in addition to explaining that to you, we would also like to explain how that allows us to do things that Shlomo on Apple can't do, or can't do as well as our AI can. So as we've been saying for a long time on the show and elsewhere, it really is about the transaction between the consumer and the company that's collecting data. So long as this transaction and the details of that transaction are open and controllable by the user, I'm not willing. I don't trust any company, even Apple. But for the lowercase version of trust that I extend to billion-dollar companies, I'm willing to trust Google and I'm willing to trust Apple.
Yeah, I think Google.
From the perspective of someone,
go ahead.
From the perspective of someone that uses an iPhone pretty much exclusively. If I ever use an Android device, it's really just kind of testing something out. It's not on a daily basis. I look at this assistant from Google and think, yeah, but nobody's ever going to use that in the real world. And here's why I say that. Because Siri doesn't work on iPhone very well at all, so it's useless to me. I don't use it ever because I'm constantly having to recorrect it and make it do what I want it to do. So I give up and I stop using it. So for Andy, do you use a Android product? Do you use the Google Assistant a lot? And do you see this as something that like the average Android user might use all the time because of its convenience?
I would say so. I use an Android Pixel, a Google Pixel, as my daily driver, and my smart speakers are all Google Home devices. And as soon the biggest impediment, I think, to using the Assistant and these other voice devices is just that you have to know that, oh, by the way, you don't have to format when you want to create an appointment. You don't have to format it. If you just simply put all the details in your request, it will figure it out and then confirm it back to you. And I think that people will continue to use this more and more as it becomes more like natural English speech. It sounds very, very naive and simple, but a big breakthrough, I think, came when one of the most basic commands, like what's the weather tomorrow, and the weather in blah, blah, will be this, and then you can simply say, is it going to rain? Like, it's not expected to. It will rain tomorrow afternoon from 4 to 6. Well, what about in Boston? In Boston, it will be clear and sunny. How about in Boston the day after that? And you don't have to repeat these commands over and over again. It feels like a natural conversation. When they're able to expand that little by little, month by month, into other things that we want to do, like, hey Guillermo, I've got some avocados that are going to go bad tomorrow, and also some sour cream, and I really bought way too many carrots. What can I cook that can use all this stuff up? And it will tell you, here's what you can do. And these are times when Shlomo responds with, here are some things on the web I found about this thing. Right, it's like, exactly. Oh, Shlomo, I love you, but I really want you to be better than you are.
Yeah.
Well, Google has the same problem. Apple has this problem too. In order for this stuff to work, they need more information. Apple's choice is not to collect it. As a result, Shlomo ain't that great. Google, I think, probably is taking the middle road here. Facebook's just going to collect it. And Google's trying to take the middle road, saying, well, we're going to let you know we're collecting it. We are going to give you some options. But honestly, if you want the best experience with Assistant, and they showed things, the contextual understanding that the Assistant had that really require it knowing everything about you. They made restaurant recommendations. Well, in the past, you could ask it, what should I cook for dinner tonight? And they would show you based on your search results. It's not like they know what's in your fridge, although that's just a matter of time. But what's important is I think they said at the bottom of each recommendation how they knew that. And they needed to do more stuff like that, do more stuff on the phone, collect the data, but give you the chance to delete the data after a period of time. And that's what I think that's going to be the new Google.
Can you imagine if Instagram ads did that? People would stop panicking about their devices listening in on them.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
Yeah. And I also like the fact that Google does appear to be listening. The fact that they made like privacy as one of like the 3 pillars for the next version of Android, saying that this is explicitly something that we're working on, because not just because we know that we're about to be regulated out of existence by the EU and by Congress any day now, but we do know that this is something that is important for us to do. So that's what we're going to do for you guys. It was another intriguing thing of saying that, well, we're going to add incognito mode to maps. We're going to add incognito mode to search. So if you don't want certain things to be visible to Google, you can still use Maps, a dumber version of Maps, but they won't know that you were going to, a certain part of town.
Burger King the 3rd time today, Andy.
I suspect if they give people the choice and people could see the trade-off, that people will choose to give Google the information because there's value in it, right, Lori?
Yeah, I completely agree. We just need the choice. When it's done without our knowledge, it feels like somebody's trapping us or somebody's, spying on us. But if we're giving them that choice, I've always felt this way. Transparency is the most important thing. We can look at this information and decide for ourselves that we want to give it to them in exchange for whatever convenience. But when it's all being done without our knowledge and without us understanding what's really being done with our data, that's when it starts to get creepy and weird, instead of something you feel like you're exchanging for like a good service. So I think that's very true. Let us know what we're doing. Give us the choice to accept or decline that, and then we feel like we're in charge of what's happening with our data.
At this point, it looks like Google is ascendant in terms of what it can do with AI and its voice assistant. It isn't the #1 seller by even close. Amazon's Echo beats everybody. Should Apple do what Microsoft has done? Microsoft threw in the towel. Yesterday, they basically said, so we got a voice assistant, but we figure you'll use it to interact with other voice assistants, which is their strategy, and then you're going to use it in business. What do you think, Rene, what should Apple do about Siri at this point?
I think, I would be more concerned if they hadn't just made a huge investment in building up a whole new organization within the company. They got John Gianandrea in, used to run search and AI at Google, so he's got the credentials. They're hiring people. Like, I'm blanking on his name, but the guy who did the adversarial networks.
The GAN stuff,
and they're really, GAN. And they're building out that team the way they built out Johnny Cerrugi's Silicon team.
But they can have the smarts, but they don't have the data.
So I think I'm not sure about that, because there are different ways to handle data. So, and I think there's a lot of conflation that goes on here. One is that there are a lot of sources for data. So for example, they trained Face ID on tens of thousands of faces. They just didn't use customers. They brought in tens of thousands of volunteers. That doesn't scale. But there are ways to accumulate data and not use it for the business. So for example, if you're okay with data harvesting, but you don't want that used for drone programs, you don't want that used for advertising, you don't want that used in a business sense, that's still a huge opportunity. And I think they also realized when they started getting to the healthcare stuff that you can't be absolutist about this. There are situations, for example, they talked about it with the MS study, where people they can't enter their own data, and you have to provide ways for them to share that. And I think that there are a lot of, Gianandrea's whole thing is ethical AI. Like, he was one of the biggest proponents of doing AI, but doing it in a way that was ethical and for the good of the people, sort of thing. And they can do a lot of stuff to collect data, to anonymize it where it makes sense, to de-identify it, to do a lot of other things, and still get enormous value from it without then turning around and using it to fund an advertising business, which some people just see as a conflict.
Yeah, that is a conflict. I mean, that is Google's bottom line. It's not Apple's bottom line. So inherent conflict. Google is taking a page from Apple's playbook, though. I mean, they're clearly seeing all that.
Well, I remember that a few years ago, they did what was a pretty outrageous step at the time, which is to define themselves as, we are an AI company. We are, all of our products are extensions of artificial intelligence, just like Apple, I think, has not announced, but they do define themselves as a design company or as a human product company, and everything that they do gets filtered through that mindset. But although we're slagging a lot on Shlomo right now, realize that Apple does a lot of things inside the lab labs that aren't constrained by their own rules. So they are definitely looking at ways that they could create, that they could ways that they could make Siri as capable as the assistant once certain technologies that allow them to implement these features in a private and secure way becomes available. And there's a whole bunch of theory on differential privacy coupled with the ability to move the AI model from the server onto the device. We don't know that maybe in 2 years from now, all of these Legos will click back into place inside the labs inside Apple. And rather than being able to create a really great and impressive new demo and new release every single year, we'll get all of that all at once in 2 years' time, only with all of the privacy that comes with an Apple product.
Maybe.
And it's also important to remember that Steve Jobs.
I don't know.
No, it's also important to remember that Steve Jobs died, Scott Forstall was fired, and Bill Stainer joined the company and took over Siri. I think he'd been there for weeks at the time. So there was a whole lost dark age of Siri where just nobody cared about it, and now there's someone with the best credentials in the world caring about it.
There's a point at which you do what Microsoft's done, which is that we are so far behind now. I mean, the race. The race is really to Amazon and Google at this point.
But that's okay. That's what happens when a company knows what it's about, knows what its business is. Yeah. Microsoft, I think one of the smartest things they ever did was forget about being the first to anything or being we've got the next and greatest and most wonderful and speculative technologies. They know that we are the ugly grease gun that keeps the wheels of business moving. Yeah. And it will never be pretty. It will never necessarily be elegant. But if we can, although we'd love to have like the sort of artificial intelligence assistant that everybody thinks, oh my God, I can't believe that such thing. We are living in a world of the future. If it makes Microsoft Office Suite and Microsoft Windows a better business product to say, you know what? Why should we try to compete with the greatest AIs in the world when we can just simply make our operating system and software the most open in the world to whatever AI and voice assistant that you're using? That's a really good thing.
That's exactly what Nadella has done. Although yesterday at Build, they did have a video of a continuous conversation with Cortana. But a couple of big differences. One, Google's was a live demo with an actual person holding a phone. Two, it was a woman walking through her day, her agenda, her meeting schedule. It was very business focused for Microsoft. For Google, it was, let me show you pictures of my last trip. And, you know, obviously they both could do either. But I think it's pretty clear from a consumer point of view that people are going to want what Google does.
Yeah, I think it's very telling that we are perfect. I almost naturally say whenever there's a microphone in my presence, wherever it is, I always say Alyosha, and I always say Guillermo, and I always say Shlomo. But I say Cortana without any mental.
Yeah, nobody's begging us, stop saying Cortana. Not yet.
I think when it comes to AI and this digital assistant thing, the race to be the best, like you're saying, it comes down to Google and Amazon, really. Who are the ones that are making smart home speakers that are the most popular? It's those two companies.
That's right.
Apple only makes a HomePod. Is there any Windows?
There's one. Yeah, it's from Harman Kardon. It's called the Invoke. So when you think about what makes a smart assistant really important to people, it's that speaker. Right.
On their phones, it's a little less important because you can just do it on that. So I'm thinking that in this situation, Amazon and Google, they have multiple smart speakers out on the industry, and that's why they're trying so hard to be the best at what they're doing and why they're working, with AI so much. But I don't think that in terms of who's going to buy the next Apple product versus who's going to buy the next Google product, I think they're so different that Apple is not assuming that because the Google Assistant is better than the Apple Assistant that you won't buy an iPhone for it. Right. So they're not working as hard to meet that standard.
A lot of that Google stuff is available on your, will be available on your iPhone. Although Google today announced that they have, 2.5 billion active devices, which is almost exactly double what Apple announced in its analyst call last week.
That there's a big difference there. Remember that 2.5 billion devices equals like the blister pack phones that sell for next to nothing.
But all of them are collecting data, regardless of how much it costs.
Most of them are. Yeah, you're right.
So they have a lot more inputs Actually, we'll talk about the quarterly results, the second quarter results, because when we parted last week, Lory and Rene were about to launch into a marathon analyst call, and I'd like to know what their thoughts are.
Can I just ask one more Google question before we move on, Leo?
Sure.
So, like, the one thing I thought was really interesting is the way that they positioned the Pixel 3a. Like, if I was them, I would have come out and said, look, we made the Pixel and it's obvious that a lot of more of you want access to that technology. So we made the Pixel 3a. But they decided to kind of sort of blame higher end phones for some of the Pixel woes and talk about how they could make a cheaper phone. But at that point, when they start saying, we don't need the hardware, we can do it all in software, I just want to ask, why not just release that camera app then? Because there are like third-party ports of it to other phones, and people are saying, works great on my Poco phone.
Yeah, in fact, the 3A does not have that dedicated DSP chip that the more expensive Big Brother has, and yet I was looking at Dieter Bohn's review in The Verge. He had a early version, and his review was off embargo as soon as they announced it. He said it's every bit as good. The camera's every bit as good on the 3A as it is on its more expensive.
And if they're competing with their own vendors and they're competing based on camera, and that camera turns out not to be hardware exclusive, and Google is Google, it makes you wonder why there just isn't the Google camera.
Well, I wouldn't be surprised at some point if they do that. In fact, one of the ways Google's handling the problem Android has with updates, and they doubled down on it again today, is, well, we're moving more and more of the system into the App Store. So whether the manufacturer or the carrier wants you to or not, we can update it, and you will update it from the App Store. That's big news for people who are stuck on Android 4 or Android 5, and there's no way to get it updated.
To answer Rene's question, I think that competitiveness is part of the equation for sure. But I think another part of it is how binary the operation of a camera app is. One of the greatest features of the iPhone's camera app will always seem to be that, without question, if you tap on the camera app icon, it launches in a split second, and every time you tap that round button, you get a picture. If you hold it down, you'll always get a sequence of pictures without delay. And with even on a Pixel phone, the Android camera app works that way 97% of the time.
Every once in a while, you sit. Just sitting there holding the bag.
Like, well, I guess like, hey, Guillermo, open my drawing app because I need to draw a picture of the thing.
I guess I'll memorize this event.
So apparently they don't jettison the memory fast enough or something in some cases.
So I imagine, I think that part of the problem is releasing it as a general app and making sure that people will not have a horrible experience on their phone, even if they just limit it to like the top 6 phones.
That's what Apple's advantage is. They make the hardware and the software.
Yeah. And to be fair to Apple, even when Google does make the hardware and the software, it's not always perfect.
Yeah, so not as good. And that may be an Android limitation as well. One other thing, as long as we're talking about the phone, I was thrilled to see no notch and a headphone jack.
Yep.
But is that saying that people who can't afford more expensive phones don't deserve a notch?
I think this whole 3A announcement. This whole 3A announcement is Google's version of what Apple did with the Mac Pro. We goofed, is what they're saying.
Mea culpa.
Mea culpa. Because, in fact, in their quarterly results, they said the Pixels did not sell well. There were, what do they call it, headwinds.
And this is like a Pixel, right? Like, this is a Google phone that everyone is used to.
I think they acknowledged.
It's inexpensive, utilitarian.
They acknowledged we're charging too much. People don't want a notch, and they do want a headphone jack. And I hope, in a way, this is Google's mea culpa saying, okay, you want that? We'll give you that.
I think it's that they can read the numbers as well as anybody else. There's not as much money in the Android market, both for apps and for hardware, as there is in the iOS market, which, remember that any Apple product is almost by definition of that logo a premium luxury brand product. So I think they acknowledge that there are people the market has started to lose its taste for $800 phones, particularly when there are really great $500 phones out there. And we want to sell hardware. We want to put devices in people's hands. So we're at least going to add this to the mix.
And like OnePlus is getting huge buzz. There's a lot of really good, not too expensive phones. 17, and I think like the rumor was that Google really badly wanted an iPhone. And I think we already have an iPhone. There's something that Google can do that's way more interesting than an iPhone. And it sounds like they're getting back to that.